to the Grow Podcast. I'm Pastor Mike with New Hope Network. We're here to help you take your next step in your relationship with Jesus. I'm so glad you're with us today.
What's up, New Hope family? Welcome to the Grow Podcast, episode 102. With me, as always, for the last time, is Pastor Mike.
As always for the last time? What does that mean?
Well, you're with me as always.
Okay.
That's what I always say. But this is the last time you'll be with me on the Grow Podcast. It's Pastor Mike. Hello, Pastor Mike.
Hello, David.
And we have a special guest who, as of next week, will no longer be a special guest.
He'll be a regular.
You won't be special next week.
Not anymore?
No. But this week you're special.
Just a tiny bit.
So Pastor Leo from Pagasa Hundug Church is here. Hi, Pastor Leo.
Hello.
I wish we had the raucous applause. Can we get raucous applause for Pastor Leo, please?
He's even applauding.
He's giving himself raucous applause.
Yeah.
So here's my opening question for you, Leo. Did he say the name of PH Church correctly?
Close.
I nailed it. Yeah,
Close
perfectly.
enough.
Who says it better, me or Pastor Mike?
He's leaving, right?
Yeah, he's going to be gone soon.
You did.
Yeah, thank you. Would you say the name of it so we can hear it correctly?
Pag-asang handog.
Yeah, exactly how I said it.
Yeah.
The people, in fact, the people listening are probably confused as to who just said that. It's going to be very difficult.
Which means what?
An offering of hope.
Pastor Leo, we're going to have an on-air production meeting here. I want you just a little closer to your microphone when you talk, just to make sure we get great audio. Yeah, you're going to go around the...
Earlier, he
it's
heard
an
you
offering
say,
of hope.
be closer to your mic, and he thought it was talking about me.
Be closer to Pastor Mike. Can you just scoot it over?
Instead of the actual
An offering
microphone.
of hope. And that was, I remember when, the first little glimmer of an idea happened with your church. But then I don't remember what meeting we were in. We were in some sort of meeting and we were talking about how you were trying to name it because there's no, is this correct? There's no perfectly direct translation of New Hope into the language that you speak that has a hard name that I'm not going to say because I'll also say that wrong.
What? Bagong pag-asa?
Yeah. Those are words. Here's my first question for you, Leo. Is the Grow Podcast in the future going to be in English? Because it's going to be really tough for me if not.
We can if you want.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Or I can teach you Tagalog.
Maybe every week you'll teach me one word.
Sure.
In Tagalog.
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 Yeah.
This is the first moment I've known that there's a G on the end.
Yeah.
This week, the word you're teaching me is the language.
There we go.
Tagalog.
This could be fun.
Nailed it.
To teach him a word every week.
Yeah. So when we do our worship recordings for our online campus, and our worship team is amazing, but Michael and I are always setting up, during the day. And for, I think it was 4 straight months, we started doing this bit that I wish we recorded where he gave me a 30-second drum lesson. He couldn't teach me for more than 30 seconds, and I couldn't practice for more than 30 seconds. And then I didn't touch the drums again until the next month when we set up. And I wish we would have kept doing it for a year. How good could I get at drums with one 30-second lesson a month?
That would have been a great video montage.
We should have done that. Yeah, we should have done that. So maybe we'll do that with your native language. Tagalog.
Yeah. Tagalog,
Nailed it. I'm pretty proud of myself. Well, but Pastor Leo is with us. Most of you know by now, because most of you join us every single week on the Grow Podcast. But Pastor Mike is leaving. This will be the last time he's on the podcast with. And I mean, if you come back, Pastor Mike, we'll always have a microphone available for you. We might make you sit in the middle, though.
Right.
If you come back and visit, you're going to be in the middle. But Pastor Leo is going to be taking over the Grow Podcast. We're going to talk about what that's going to look like, and we'll explain a little bit more of that today. But that's why Pastor Leo is here with us. So that's why you're only special this week.
Yeah.
You lose your specialness next week. Sorry.
We've always known you were special.
I am. That's why I work with
what was your
kids with special needs.
Good answer. There's no comeback for that one, Pastor Mike.
No. I'll get myself in trouble no matter how I...
What was your first reaction when Pastor Mike came and talked to you about taking over the Grow Podcast? Was it, what's the Grow Podcast?
Yeah. What? What's a Grow Podcast? Is it about plants?
That's a good question. We could add some botany in the future.
No, it was... I got scared, actually.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. It's an intimidating thing.
Is that because I'm here, or?
Well, it's because of. Let's forget about him.
Yeah,
it's because of you.
Yeah.
No, but it's taking over something that Pastor Mike has been doing for the longest time, of course, is daunting.
Sure.
At the very least. So, yeah, it was.
I can see that.
It was scary, but I prayed about it, and God challenged me. So I said yes.
I'm very glad that you did. I'm also glad that he challenged you. He does that
Yes.
sometimes. A lot of the time.
He does it a lot with me. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, he likes to nudge you out of your comfort zone quite a bit, huh?
Nudge.
So
But
it's Pastor Mike, but differently.
it was more like a push.
A shove. It was like a
Yeah.
two-handed shove
Yep.
rather than a nudge. Yeah.
with a running start too. So.
Just like a body check in
Right.
hockey into the boards. Pastor Mike, what was it? Why did you? We have a few pastors on staff, and honestly, we have a few people that also would be good at the Grow podcast.
Yep.
I've tried to get some of them to replace me in the past, and they have rejected. But so why were you thinking Leo? Why is that the direction that kind of we landed on?
Well, I think there's multiple reasons, but one of them, as I prayed about it and thought about it, I felt like this was the direction the Holy Spirit wanted us to go for the interim until we have a new lead pastor of the network. I think another part of it is I love the idea of hearing from one of our church planters.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Instead of someone from our core, main campus.
Yep.
And Leo is just a phenomenal, in-depth teacher. If you've listened to him or heard him teach, and you will in the coming weeks, you'll thoroughly enjoy it. And then you add the cultural nuance from growing up in the Philippines and his heritage there. I think it's gonna enrich all of us, and I'm looking forward to sitting under his teaching in the coming weeks as I get to listen to it instead of teach it for a while.
Yay.
It'll be fun, and we're gonna do something a little bit different because this is an interim time. We don't know what it's going to look like when the new person comes in, so there'll be no necessarily direct teaching or tie-in to the weekend teaching, at least of the Williston or the New Hope campuses. It might tie in some to the PH Church.
It might.
What's that?
It might.
It might, here and there. But one of the things as we talk through what we want to kind of approach it, how we kind of want to approach this is to walk through a book of the Bible and just get as far as we can in the interim time. So I don't know about the two of you, and I know not everybody had this experience, but for me growing up, we had, this was back in the day when we went to church every time the church doors opened. If the pastor is painting the wall, we had to go and watch the pastor paint the wall. It felt that way sometimes. But we had on Sunday mornings, we had Sunday school, then we had regular church, and we all had regular church. And then we came back Sunday night for Sunday night church. And then we'd come back Wednesday night and we'd have something for the kids or youth group, but the parents, the adults, would have Wednesday night Bible study where they'd walk through a book of the Bible. And we also had a small group in our home, so every time we turned around, we had something. And honestly, sometimes it was too much. But one of the richest times for me was on Wednesday nights. There were times, especially once I got in high school, where I would join my parents in the Wednesday night Bible study. And the pastor or a leader, sometimes my dad, would just walk us through a book of the Bible in a way you can't do on the weekend and really shouldn't do on the weekend. Because it's kind of that core teaching. It's growth teaching, not necessarily making sure that it's accessible for someone who's trying to discover Jesus. And so that's some of the things that Leo and I talked about. We're going to walk through you're going to walk through one of my favorite books of the Bible. We talked about it. Yes. No, we talked about it actually
word through numbers, number by number.
A couple weeks ago when we were talking about Paul.
What's that?
Leviticus too.
Yeah, we'll hit Leviticus after. Yeah.
We're going to connect those two together. No, the book of Romans.
Oh, that's probably a better place to start.
So, and we may not get through the whole thing, but we're going to get as far as we can and walk through it. And Leo and I, as we talked through it and talked about a few other books of the Bible, this is just the one we really felt like this is where we needed to go.
So why Romans and not Leviticus and Numbers?
Well, I was thinking about it, and the way I see it, when I read the Book of Romans. Like every time I read the Book of Romans, it's like Christianity 101.
Sure.
And 201 and 301 and
201.
401. It's,
Yep.
it's like it's all of it. Yeah.
Yeah, but it starts with very basic concepts that are not that hard to digest, and then it gets deeper and deeper as you go along. And so I think, and I was praying about it, and it seems like a very good jump off point.
Sure.
For us to go through, and before dealing with other things or other books or other topics, let's start with the basics of everything.
And
so,
Pastor Mike, you've said that it's if not your favorite, one of your favorite books.
It's I think one of the richest in the Bible. Ironically, I was packing boxes, which is what I'm doing a lot these days, and I came across a 3-ring binder about that thick, and then this huge 3 poster board kind of outline of Romans, where I've taught through Romans and actually took a real in-depth class in Romans in the past, and just thoroughly enjoyed this. It's kind of the chocolate chip cookie of the Bible.
there we go.
Interesting.
You like that? The chocolate
My dad
chip,
would like that.
Yeah, the
that
chocolate
analogy.
chip
That's his favorite
cookie. Think about that's like the all-purpose dessert. It's like the go-to kind of dessert. There's a lot of great fancy desserts, but if there's just a basic one, you get milk and cookies. I mean, I know David's mind is going. He's thinking about other desserts, but yeah. But it's just like. It's the go-to dessert, and that's really what Romans is. Martin Luther, back in the Protestant Reformation, said if all he had was the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, so the story of Jesus and the book of Romans, it would be more than enough for our faith. Because you have the Gospels that introduce us to Jesus, and you have the book of Romans that teach us and ground us and teach us how to grow.
Right.
John Wesley was reading a commentary on Romans. Now, that sounds not thrilling at all. But he was reading commentary on Romans, and when he described his heart was strangely warmed, which that's kind of that 17th, century, or is it 17th century? What century was that? 1700s.
18th.
Yeah, 18th century. I don't. Math and history.
Oh man.
That's that language that we wouldn't use that phrase today. People would take it all kinds of weird places, but basically it was this surrender experience with the Holy Spirit, and where he just grew in that moment in his discovery of what it means to be fully surrendered and to be a person who is constantly growing, which of course is what the Grow podcast is all about. So I think that's very strategic for us.
Yeah. Let's talk a little more about Romans, and then I want to talk a little bit more about Leo, because some, if not a lot of our people might not know a ton about you. So I have some questions about Leo. For the audio listeners, Leo's waving right now, but
wait.
Yeah, always. That's one thing, Leo. On the Grow podcast, anytime you make any sort of hand motion or gesture, you have to verbalize it
now
as well.
He tells me.
So, 102 episodes in, Pastor Mike.
Now he tells me.
But so you already mentioned who wrote Romans.
Yeah.
It was Paul.
I feel like we need
do we know
buzzer here to see who can buzz
what
in.
about
Roman Reigns? I thought he wrote Romans.
Who's Roman Reigns?
See, for those of you who don't know, it's like, for the wrestling fans out there.
Oh, he's a wrestler. Yeah, that's out of my wheelhouse. Roman, is he now, or is he like back in the day?
He's a now.
Okay,
he's a now wrestler.
I wasn't like into wrestling growing up, but I knew who they were. Like the video games on Nintendo 64 were so fun. That
I'm beginning to reconsider if I want Leo.
See, there we go. We'll do a body slam here at the table.
Wow.
I feel like, and I was going to get to this later, but I feel like the Grow podcast is going to become very exciting because, like Pastor Leo and then myself, both of us are not born in America. We're both from the Pacific. He is from the Philippines. I'm from Australia. So we're mostly going to talk about things from kind of that region of the world.
Yay.
We'll probably spend about 30 minutes on that, and then we'll quickly touch on Romans, and then we'll move on. I'm just kidding. Pastor Mike looks very feisty.
I'm going to start sending in mean comments.
Do we know when Romans was written? When was Romans written? Pastor Mike, you want to take this one?
Between 56 and 58 AD is our best guess. So if it's between, let's say 57, we'll just settle on that.
Do we know?
We've decided that officially.
Do we know where he was when he wrote Romans?
I'm curious what you think on that.
Um,
Officially, no.
Officially, no, yes. But I'm thinking he might have been incarcerated somewhere.
Kind of belief. He had not been to Rome yet.
Right.
So that was part of his purpose, was to help the churches or the church in Rome. Most believe it was during some of his travels in kind of the Turkey, what we would call the Turkey region, modern day Turkey these days is in that region, kind of the Galatian region back then.
And so you just said...
Oh, I just answered your next question.
But you said the church or the churches. Were there multiple churches in Rome? Was there one church in Rome that he wrote this to? Was there even a church, or was it just like, 5 guys that hung out every once in a while with their wives? And who was he writing to?
He just addresses the church.
Right.
But often when they would write letters like this to a city, it was the church in the city. But a lot of the churches were made up of smaller groups, or if they got too big, they would split. They used the old Jewish model, the synagogue model. They would split into smaller synagogues, smaller kinds of things. But still, that city would be called the church. So we don't know exactly how many, and it most likely was multiple small groups.
Now, I know for a fact that he wrote, part of his letter was for the Jewish believers.
Yeah.
And then the part of it was for the Gentiles. So we know that he was addressing a mixed bag of believers. So it, like what Pastor Mike said, it could be one big church or just pockets of small groups of people meeting together. So.
And do we know who brought the gospel to Rome? Some of his letters are written to churches he planted, or we know, this is the person who started that church or whatever.
Right.
But do we have any of that kind of information on the church in Rome?
Not as far as I remember.
The prevailing belief is that Jewish believers who made a decision for the Lord on the day of Pentecost.
Right.
That's kind of the prevailing belief, and I'm not exactly sure what evidence they have that on, but that's kind of the
popular
what most
theory
think.
Sure. Okay. Leo, you can answer this one. Why? Most of Paul's letters, really all of Paul's letters, there's a very clear why was this written. We went over a lot of that, Pastor Mike, on the Grow podcast as we were talking about some of his different letters. But why did he write Romans? What was the purpose of this letter, especially to a church he'd never been to before?
Right. Well, part of it was he was answering very important questions, and that's one of the things that I read. He was answering very important questions about a lot of things, and he was providing direction, he was providing guidance, he was providing encouragement, and that's the reason why Pastor Mike said it's like the chocolate chip cookie of Paul's letters, because it tackles a lot of almost everything. And so like in my case, whenever I feel down, whenever I feel depressed, or whenever I need encouragement and guidance, that's one of the first places that I go to, because it just provides a lot of answers to a lot of questions. So it was relevant then, and I still find it very relevant today.
Why is it so long? In comparison, just you look at Romans, and then let's hop over to maybe his next saying most popular seems weird, but let's hop over to Galatians, which is 6 chapters long. Why it's so much longer, so much more in depth, and more not more significant in terms of those other ones aren't important, but there's so much more he gets to in it.
Paul kind of hints at that at the beginning when he begins to tell the purpose of his writing. He's wanting to teach a church that he hadn't been there, and to their knowledge, they hadn't had any of the disciples or any of the leaders there to connect all of the dots. Almost all of his other letters were written to answer specific questions or specific problems. This one was not for specific questions or problems. This one was intended to be a treatise on what it means to be a Christian, and baseline theology. So this
Right.
was like the first systematic theology given to us. And so that it just takes time
Sure.
to work through. And he's a preacher, and we preachers like lots of words.
Yes, we do.
No. Okay, so you kind of mentioned, Leo, earlier you mentioned that like part of it is to Jewish believers, part of it is to Gentile believers. Pastor Mike, you said at the beginning, he kind of talks about that. So what's kind of give us kind of the outline. I don't know which one of you wants to go over that, but or did he just, because you said pastors like a lot of words, did he just start writing and then he just went to, wherever I feel like talking about next is what I'll talk about next.
It's
That's
like
how I write.
he needed to kill time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He vamps a lot in
Yeah.
like chapters 6 through 9, and then
Now, from what I read, there's one interesting thing that I read. There's an outline that he follows, or sort of follows in the book of Romans, and it's all about righteousness. And as you go along, he starts talking about righteousness needed, and then he sort of answers that question. He goes into righteousness being provided through Jesus, and then through Jesus too, then he goes into righteousness being vindicated, and then the last part of it would be righteousness being practiced. So and that's the reason why it's also so long, because there's a process that he kind of goes into.
sure.
So yeah, that's sort of the general outline that I read about Romans, which was very interesting because it makes a lot of sense. You talk about what you need first, and then it's provided to you through Jesus, and then what does that do? And then that's righteousness vindicated, and then how do you practice it? Now that you have it, how do you practice
It's one of the reasons this book, I think, is so good for believers of all things, because what Leo just talked about so well is, he walks through and he uses his word righteous, but he kind of puts the Christian life on a timeline.
Right.
And so he describes, here's life before Jesus, here's why we need Jesus. We've all fallen short of the glory of God. And then what happens when we come to know Jesus? Here's the things we're going to wrestle with. Here's the second point, surrender. So he just, when you begin to understand it, even though he teaches us from a theological standpoint, it's walking us through the Christian journey.
Let's stick with Romans now, and then we'll end with learning more about Pastor Leo. But so Leo, what's kind of the plan? How are we going to operate? For instance, for the last 101 episodes, the plan has basically been we dive deeper into Pastor Mike's message from Sunday. Before we started doing the greatest story, there was always we used to call it homework, and I stopped doing that because nobody likes homework. So we called it our next step for the week. Just something to put into practice when we leave. This is the thing we should be doing this week. But then during the greatest story, the homework or the next step was just make sure you're reading along with us.
Right.
So what's the format going to be for us as we go through Romans? Are we doing, like one verse a week, and we're just going to really, dive into the...
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah.
Spend until episode 300
to get through the first chapter. Yeah.
We're going to start with, for the most part, we're going to break each chapter into two sessions.
Okay.
You call it
Two
sessions?
episodes.
2 episodes. So like for this one, we're going to start with, for the first chapter, we're going to start with verse 1 until 17.
Okay.
So that's your, what do you call it? Not homework.
Next step.
Your
next step for next week would be to read Romans 1 through 17.
Yep.
Okay.
Read Romans 1
Need to
through
write that down,
17.
so we put that in the notes.
And then we're going to go from there. So for the most part, each chapter will be broken down into 2 episodes.
Okay.
So
Nice.
we'll spend the next 20-something episodes going through the book of Romans. It's
Yeah.
going to be fun.
It will be. And now, Pastor Mike, I know you wanted to talk a little bit about like the difference between we're doing like a deep study on Romans. So how should we read this differently than if we're just like our daily devotions, where I'm gonna, I'm spending my time with the Lord this morning. What's the difference? And honestly, why is there a difference?
My last teaching thought on the Grow podcast is how to read for this. So when we read devotional, we read to listen for the voice of the Holy Spirit. When we read to study, that's part of it.
Right.
But we're diving into it more deeply. So and don't overcomplicate it. I encourage people to read through whatever the passage is. So the first 17 verses. Plan on reading through it 3 times. I try to read through it, the entire section fairly quickly the first time. Just read it so you get the bigger picture of it. Sometimes I'll read a little bit before, a little bit after, if it fits. Then I'll read through it again. So the first time I won't make any notes or anything on it. I just want to read it and digest it. It's a little bit like going on a hike with a camera or without a camera. And if I'm constantly stopping and taking pictures, that's great, but I'm constantly stopping and taking pictures.
Right.
So the first time, just go for the walk, read the whole thing, then read it through again, maybe the next day if we're doing this every week, and just make notes on things that you noticed, things that stood out to you, questions that you have. You could always send in a question ahead of time.
Absolutely.
And we have those, and then I'll read it through a last time and begin to, as now that I've read it 2 other times, begin to look for patterns, phrases, key words, because when the Holy Spirit inspired them to write, if they keep repeating a word, there's a reason for it.
Right.
And then there's key words, like, it sounds weird, but the word therefore, translated in English, always means they've built up to this moment.
Right.
So like Romans chapter 12 starts with therefore. It's a very key transition moment in the entire book. So you look what the therefore is. Therefore, I had to get my last thought.
Oh, my word.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. And the purpose of the Grow podcast has never been just so that you can listen and then join us again the next week. That's why there has always been homework or a next step or something practical that we can leave with to put in place. And we don't do that because, if I'm being honest, guys, when I listen to a podcast, I am not looking for homework.
Come on. I don't understand.
I'm really, really not. But this podcast isn't just an entertainment podcast. Now, I hope that you are entertained. First of all, I find it entertaining to learn. So that part we hope is entertaining. We goof around on the podcast as well and have some fun. And I'm pretty sure that's going to continue because I've known Leo for a little while now. And between the two of us, that's going to keep happening. But the purpose is for us to grow. That's why it's called the Grow Podcast. And growth starts with a next step. We say that every single week. We're going to continue to say that every single week. And it doesn't, so this next step is so important. And I don't want you to stop listening because I'm stressing the homework part of it, but read along with us as we're going through this. Take this as a Bible study that you're going through. And it really doesn't take, we're doing 17 verses in a week. Like you can read 17 verses 3 times in a week and it won't impact you that much. And if so many of you have been so committed and so loyal to this podcast, and I absolutely know that a big part of that is Pastor Mike, and he's such a great teacher and a great communicator. But don't let this leave your life because if it's been something that's helped you grow in your faith with God, because that's why we're here. We're not here for me and Pastor Mike to have fun. We're not here because Pastor Mike is really cool, even though he is. We're here. we're here because we want you to grow in your faith in Christ. And so I'm really, really excited for this, whatever this portion of the Grow podcast
It's
until we
next
have a new lead pastor here, and then they'll decide what things are going to go from there. But I think this is going to be a really amazing journey. I'm excited to learn. I'm excited to learn from Leo. I'm excited to learn just as I'm doing my own reading, and I'm excited for all of you too, because I think it's going to be really, really beneficial. But I really want to encourage you to make that a priority. Don't just listen to us every week and let us fill you in on what you didn't read that week. Be reading along with us, because it's going to completely change your understanding of what we're talking about. And then Pastor Mike mentioned, you could send in questions after the fact. If you have a question on Romans 1 when we're in Romans 8, send it in, and we will talk about it on the podcast. Yep. We will open the podcast with, hey, here's some questions we had from listeners.
Right.
And because we want to help you grow. That's the whole reason that we're here. I love doing the podcast, but I could take a nap right now. I'm always good with a nap. But we're here because we really believe that this is a great tool for all of us to grow. And so make sure you commit to that. Sorry, my rant is over now. All right, let's learn a little bit more about Leo before we go, because I want people
This could be fun.
to understand who Leo is. Now, you were born in the Philippines.
Yes.
That's a whole different country, I understand.
Really? Yes. It is.
What? Tell us where you were from in the Philippines, if you would.
I am from Manila, specifically.
That's probably the one city in the Philippines that everybody listening has heard of. So that's fantastic news.
But that's broken down into smaller cities. So
Sure.
it's Quezon City.
Okay.
That's a little bit in the northern part of Manila.
And
So
what do you miss the most about the Philippines?
the beaches.
We don't have similar beaches here in North Dakota.
7,100 islands.
That is so many islands.
Pick an island. You have a beach.
Pastor Mike, what's your favorite island in the Philippines?
I don't even know the name of an island in the Philippines.
I'm going with the one he just said. That I
Yeah.
don't need to repeat
Yeah,
the name
sure.
because
That-
everybody
Right.
heard it and we all remember it. What brought you to America?
I used to be a speech therapist for the school district. I was down in Arizona, where Pastor Mike is going. So yeah, we're trading places.
Yeah.
So there we go. I was down in Arizona for about a year and a half, a school year and a half. So there's that, and then I moved up to North Dakota. Don't ask why. Just
We know.
Because it's too
Ultimately, to
hot in
plant a church.
Arizona.
right. But yeah, it's that's true too. To plant a church. So
Yeah.
Although that's not why you moved here. You didn't know you were moving here to plant a church, correct?
yeah, back then no.
Right.
I got a job for the school district
Yeah.
as well. So yeah, I worked for the school district from 2017 all the way until before the last one that just ended. So
Okay. And because when we moved here, we've been here for 5 years. Started attending pretty shortly after we got here, and you were just a guy on the worship team that I didn't know.
yes,
And then I distinctly remember meeting you once in the lobby after a service, and that was it. And then, did I work here before? Yeah, I worked here before you started planning PH Church, right?
yes,
Yeah. And so, I don't know, Pastor Mikey, you might even be able to give input here too. But tell us just a little bit about that process. You attended New Hope. You were working in the school district. You sang on the worship team. All around cool guy. And then
Mostly.
and then
Mostly.
And then God was like, you know how you feel like things are going really well right now?
Right.
You feel comfortable? Guess what? But how did that happen? How did you become a church planner?
My wife Andy and I were part of a small group.
Let's call it what it is. It was not a small. We called it a small group, but it was not a small
No.
group. It was a large
A
group
large, small group.
of people.
It was a large small group or a small large group of Filipinos in the community, and we had Bible studies, and we were meeting every Friday evening back then, and I became one of the leaders and the teachers of that group. And during that time, and I felt it for many times in my life, but I felt God calling me again to go into ministry and to lead the group and to plant a church. And I was praying about it. I was actually praying about it, and I was saying no. Like, no, God, no, God. So it was a battle between me and God. That time I was saying no, he was saying yes. He kept, like I said, that's why he did the tackle.
We usually don't win those battles.
Right.
Those don't go well for us.
So yeah. So it was a battle between me and God for a while, and then during my prayers, I saw the wisdom of what he was doing. My heart was breaking for what the groups and the people that we are not reaching. And so I saw the need. I literally felt the need. And so I talked to my wife about it. She said, go for it. and I talked to Pastor Kylie first. Pastor Kylie talked to Pastor Mike, and the rest is history.
What do you remember about the first? So Pastor Kylie comes and talks to you about this conversation she had with Leo.
Pastor Kylie, from day one, she came to me and said, Leo feels called to plant a church. He needs to plant a church. She was absolutely, convinced. And when I met with Leo, I didn't know Leo well because I didn't work with him like she did on the worship team. And she is so gifted at calling out and raising up leaders. And when I met with him the first time, part of me in the back of my mind was I've had lots of conversations with people, and so with people who say I'm called to ministry, but when they find out, the cost, the process,
what that actually means.
Well, we'll see how far this goes. But that was before I sat down with Leo.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we began to sit down and talk about what was happening in the life of this group, one of the things, I don't know if it was the first or second time, I looked at him and said, because he was so hesitant, is this really, where the Lord's calling me? I think so. He said, you're already the pastor of this group. We just need to move forward and make this official and turn this into a church. But it already is a church, and you're already pastoring this group.
I remember that conversation.
Yeah, I wondered if you did. I don't know if it was the first, second time, but it was early on.
It was very
And
early
then
on. Yeah.
we just moved forward, and Leo is such a faithful servant, a man of high integrity, a man of who really wants to be led by the Spirit, a student, stepped into the process, because our process we're working on doesn't necessarily make it super easy. And he was just very faithful in stepping through that and walking through that. And
when you say "our," you mean the Wesleyan Church?
The Wesleyan Church, the Wesleyan Network that we're part of. And I'm probably a year from now, you're a licensed pastor.
Yes.
But probably a year from now, we're hoping you'll be ordained, correct?
Can you? Okay.
Let me say this again. Probably a year from now, you will be ordained, right?
Can
I
you
close my eyes,
Yeah.
pretend I didn't hear anything?
Can you explain to people listening the difference? Because a lot of people might not know the difference. Like what's a licensed pastor? What's an ordained pastor?
Honestly, there's not a significant difference. There's some education difference in our system.
Sure.
That just gives another little bit of education difference. The ordained pastors can serve at any level in our system, in our network, whereas license, we basically say this local context is where we're saying yes to you and giving your blessings. But there's some education difference in things. It's a little bit of a formal difference.
Yeah. Leo, what is your favorite food?
We can call him Reverend with ordained.
Oh, so I can't call him Reverend
Not
Leo yet. Okay.
Pastor, not right.
I'll avoid that.
We'll try
Hey,
semi-reverend.
Non-Reverend Leo. What's your favorite food?
Are we talking about Filipino food?
Unless that's not your favorite food.
Um,
I'm going to interrupt you.
I'm waiting
answering
for
the
him to
question
say
I just
tortillas
asked.
or something.
Pizza.
Pizza.
One of the
Fettuccine.
coolest things about PH Church is how often there is a potluck afterwards.
It is
Oh, yeah.
amazing.
And one of the other coolest things about PH Church is how willing they are to let me invade that potluck. Strongly
Yes.
recommend. 10 out of 10. So I love the Filipino food. I'm sure you do as well.
Yes,
But
I
yeah,
do.
do you have a favorite?
It's adobo. It's
Bless you.
It can be pork, it can be chicken, it can be
You had me at both of those. That
right.
sounds
I
good.
know, right?
We're already
It can be a
sold.
both.
Yeah.
It can be both pork
Okay.
and chicken, with braised in soy sauce and vinegar and just good stuff. Deliciousness.
And next week for the podcast, you're going to make me some of that.
Hey, why not?
and
We'll do
that'll
that.
be great. Yeah, that'll be good. Everyone at home will really love it.
Andy, my wife, loves cooking, so
She does.
We'll
love
make
that she loves cooking.
I know, right? We'll make her come up with a dish that I will bring.
Perfect. Pastor Mike, you're leaving to be the
Right.
district superintendent of the Southwest District. Is there there's a Filipino church?
We have several
Yeah.
Filipino churches.
So
here.
are you fluent now with all this time working with Leo? You can
No.
just go and speak to them
Not
in their
at
native language.
I know the names of some of the food. you know.
That's a good start.
Yeah.
Maybe you should have done the plan that Leo and I are going to have, and every week he's going to teach you one word, and then
I
by the
might
time
need that. I might need that.
Well, Leo, I'm very excited to do the Grow podcast with
Yep.
you. I'm
I
excited
am
to go
too.
through Romans. I know that it's going to be a great time of learning, discipleship for all of us, growing in our faith. But I'm also very sad. This is the last time we will be on the podcast together, Pastor Mike. And you've already gotten emotional a bunch of times on the podcast, I feel like, since all this. But I just kind of want to give you the floor here at the end. Anything you want to say to our New Hope family, that our Grow podcast
Oh, you
family?
didn't prepare me for that.
Nope.
Yeah. Well, and again, I feel like I use this phrase often, but we have so many little sayings that it's so easy for them to turn into cliches. And I don't want this to be a cliche. But the phrase that we use on the Grow podcast is growth always starts with the next step. And if there's one thing I could leave us with on the Grow podcast is always be asking the Holy Spirit what your next step is, because he always has one. And thanks so much for joining us. I didn't know when we started the Grow podcast if this would even be a thing. David and others actually kind of talked me into it. We've talked about that in the past. And so many of you have come alongside of us, and it's been a great journey, and you're in great hands moving forward.
Yeah. The really cool thing about the Grow podcast is, even though we were diving deeper into specific messages, and I think I talked about this a couple weeks ago, but the content is relevant.
Yeah.
So, there's 102 episodes that you can go back to and listen. And so if you haven't been with us since the beginning, that's a great way to continue. That's another great next step. Now each one of those podcasts is going to give you a next step. So you're going to get homework after each one, but that's going to stay relevant. And then as we go forward as well, we're just going to continue creating more content for us to learn and to grow. And so I'm excited for that. I love you, Pastor Mike.
Love you too, Dave.
Pastor Leo, I love you as well. I'm very excited. We'll be with you next week.
Gonna be fun.
To all of you at home, if you haven't yet, make sure you subscribe on wherever you join us, the video podcast on YouTube or the audio podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. New episodes go out every single Monday at 6 a.m. Some of our awesome
Central
people
time.
do check it out at 6 a.m. Yeah, that is Central Time. Now that you're not going to be in Central Time anymore.
Right.
You never cared when I said 6
No,
a.m.
now
before,
I know.
but now you're moving to Arizona. 6 a.m. Central Time. So if you want to be one of those super cool people that listens right at 6 a.m., I will be sleeping, but you enjoy that. We love you, New Hope family, and we will see you next time.